Alright guys, welcome back. As I mentioned in my last video, this is my 1.9 crawler that I've worked on for a little bit now. And in this video we're going to go through and make those changes that I mentioned in my last video, namely the wheels, adding a plate for the servo and battery up front, making some changes to the chassis a little bit, moving the links around, maybe some of the electronics, just some basic changes, but just to get this, I think, really dialed in. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it right now. Alright, I'm recording this voiceover on Thanksgiving, so anyone who's watching today, I want to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're having a lot of fun and eating well today. So to start, I'm removing the old wheels and tires and these hexes. These are 8mm hexes. I'm swapping them out for 6mm hexes. The wheels I'm putting on are Create-A-Crawler wheels, which is an older brand, and they have a much wider offset than the Injora beadlocks that I've been using before. So the offset of the wheels plus the offset of the hexes was just a bit too much, which is why I put on those 6mm hexes. And I always use clamping hexes on all of my trucks. It's so much easier, much less hassle. And here you can see I've got wheel weights installed on the inner ring, only for the front. I don't remember how much weight it is. I'll add a little thing on screen here. They're just taped on and then installed back onto the tire. And that is just to add a little bit more weight up front to help that front bias. And here, the easiest way to install a set of tires. So here I'm just stripping the chassis down to make those modifications I mentioned earlier. We're going to be cutting off that little tab that was used to mount the old transmission, which is no longer needed. And I'm also going to bend in the front of the chassis. So you can see the bend, it's nothing much. It's just to get the tops of the shocks in a little bit more, and then putting the chassis back together, I really need, I need an electric screwdriver. So that's just to help the angle of the shocks a little bit. I designed and 3D printed out a servo plate and battery plate, so this is just tracing it onto the aluminum and getting it cut out and drilled. Here you can kind of see the finished product. The holes aren't perfectly straight, but it's good enough, I think. And mounted on the chassis, you can see kind of how the layout will look. The top links are a little bit short, so I was just measuring how much they need to be shortened by, marking onto the existing links, and then shortening them and getting the threads cut on, and then reinstalling everything. So that is with the new servo plate and the links. You can see it's got plenty of flex for my needs. And now we need to figure out body mounts. So in my last video I'd mentioned I'd picked up these Axial body posts, and these are offset a little bit. They kind of pinch in towards the middle. I unfortunately did not drill the holes vertically into the chassis, which would have really helped in this situation. So I was able to fit in one screw, and then I just zip tied. And there's a little bit of flex there, but I'm okay with that for now. That is something I may update in the future though. And fortunately the new body post lined almost perfectly with the pre-existing dimples in the body. Again, this is a Traxxas Rustler body. And so I just cut those out and they fit just about perfect. For the front, it's the same thing, using one screw to hold them in, and then just a zip tie to kind of make sure they don't rotate around. Unfortunately, with this new mount, the servo does hit the body, so I hate to do it. I really like the grill, but it's got to come off to clear. And I ended up clearing out a little bit more of the fenders to make sure that there was plenty of clearance and everything. And here, just marking and cutting holes for the front body posts. And everything just about clears, which is perfect. So next up is getting out these old dog bones. There's just not as much steering as I would like. So I picked up a set of Axial universal axles and assembled them. And now we're going to install them. Taking out the old ones. And here, this is a bit extreme, but you can see just the difference in steering angle you get in the dog bones versus universals. So we're going to install those. So anyone who's assembled these axles before knows how much of a pain in the butt this next part is. We're going to install the spacer. We're going to install the spacer. We install the spacer and get the screws in, while using a little bit of thread lock, of course, because they're threading into metal. Putting the wheels back on, and there you can see the universal, much more shiny and new. And the steering is significantly better than what it was. Now we just use my old mount, install the electronics. This will be cleaned up and reorganized, and here it is, all put back together. Now it looks pretty much the same. Obviously the front axle looks a little bit different with that plate. The steering angle is so much better than what it was. And with that, it is done. We've made all the changes that we plan on making, for the time being, that is. I do have a few more parts coming on the way, so a part 2 upgrades may not be that far off. So back in the day, to determine if a crawler was really worth its salt, we would actually stand it on its side, on the sidewalls of the tire, and if it would stand up just like that, it was considered a good crawler, or at least the weight balance was correct. So I guess I did it. I guess I'm in the cool crawler club, you know, for what was considered cool back in the day. This thing has really turned into just about exactly what I was looking for in a crawler. It's got really good steering angle. With the universal axle set, Axial claims about 42 degrees, which I know isn't as much as like the new Vanquish or some of the newer cars, but it's way more than I have ever had. And so for me, it's perfect. This thing has been a ton of fun to wrench on and work on. A lot of custom parts on this thing, which has always been my favorite thing about RC crawling. For me, it has always been about the customization, finding something you need and seeing if you can make it yourself. So without further ado, we gotta get this thing out on the rocks. So we're gonna start with a steering test. I've not adjusted the endpoints. This is what it used to look like when turning. Part of this is because the tires used to rub up against the shock, so I had to limit it. Obviously, it was not good steering. But with the wider offset wheels and the universals, I can steer way tighter. And here you can see just how much of a difference that makes. It really is quite incredible how much the steering has been improved. I usually almost always had to do a 3-point turn just to get anywhere. For speed, this is on 2S. It's about walking speed. I'm not sure what the gearing is like. For now it's okay, I may bump it up. So I was driving, it was about 30 degrees out, so the traction on the tires isn't great. The tires are pretty cold, the rocks are pretty cold. What I'm mostly looking for here is if there's any sort of torque twist going on, which it doesn't appear that there is. But I also wanted to check, you know, flex, make sure that everything was working okay. The wider stance of the wheels really helps in situations like this. I don't get bogged down and fall into the crack. And the tight turning radius of this little obstacle really helps. It's about a 5-foot drop on the other side of this, and so having that really tight turning really helps maneuverability as well. And this shows some of the side hilling capabilities. This really is, with the wider offset now and low weight, it's really a well-balanced rig, and it feels very stable, which I really, really like. You can see a little bit of a tire lift right there. I'm not too worried about that. I will need to find a much steeper incline to really test it, but the wheel did settle back down, and it climbed right up, no issues. This was a bit of a tricky obstacle. Kind of tight turning, and you can see my wheel kind of fell in. Fortunately, I was able to pull myself out. There was some binding going on. The tires were getting kind of pulled into a crack, but we made it up just fine. Overall, this truck performs quite a bit better than it was. The noticeable difference is, of course, the steering, but also having the battery lower and more forward. Putting that servo over the front right tire really helps with the torque twist, moving the links around. And it's really subtle changes, but I think it really adds up to a really well-performing truck. So thank you all for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.